Welcome to the next edition of What's Going On Telemedicine Testosterone from the federal lawmaking side. With us today is my friend and the most amazing man in the world when it comes to legal defense. It's the anabolic lawyer, Rick Collins.
Thank you, Doc. Good to see you. Thanks for having me on. Much appreciated.
All right, Rick, let's make it very focused for these guys because we want to make sure we do a very good, accurate job in discussing exactly what's going on, because this is huge news. The pandemic came into play about 3 years ago, a little more. The Fed and the states appropriately changed laws for telemedicine so people can have access to doctors, and telemedicine laws with controlled drugs were affected. Testosterone, I think it was great. I think it's a great thing that so many men, and we're going to go into some women and even the transgender group, has had access to testosterone. And now all good things have to come to an end. So tell us first off about just to summarize from your perspective, the law, what's going on, right? The proposed law.
So in terms of the proposal, so DEA has come out recently with a proposed change to the way the federal law will be treated. And what they're basically saying is that moving forward, people who have an online TRT prescription who would be affected, or any online telemedicine prescription for a controlled substance, as of May 11th, will need to have an in-person medical evaluation by a DEA licensed practitioner. So that's going to change the way that some people and some clinics have been operating over the last few years. To really understand it, we need to go back, all the way back, I think, to really grasp it, we go back to 1990 and the couple of years before, where Congress, the United States Congress, held a bunch of hearings to determine what to do about steroids in sports. And they decided that the way to get steroids out of sports would be to make steroids, including testosterone, androgens, anabolic steroids, testosterone, to make them into Schedule III controlled substances. And that happened in 1990. The law went into effect in 1991. And this was really focused on cheating in sports. This had nothing to do with TRT, which really didn't exist the way it does now at all. It was a very different world then. But that law went into place, and that still impacts what's going on today. Cut ahead to 2008. In 2008, a kid named Ryan Hyatt went online and was accessing a rogue pharmacy, sort of a clinic that provided Vicodin and other controlled substances. We're talking opiates. We're talking painkillers, not testosterone. And bad news, he got a hold of this without ever seeing a doctor, without ever being evaluated, took it, overdosed, died. Now Congress gets back into action, and Congress says, look, we can't have rogue pharmacies just shipping out dangerous controlled substances to whoever they want. So they put into place in 2008 a law that said basically you can't get controlled substances, opiates, oxycodone, Vicodin, any of that stuff without first having an in-person medical evaluation to determine whether you need it. And so that law went into effect, and that was in effect since 2008. This isn't new. What the DEA is proposing is an adaptation on an existing law that went into effect in 2008. Now we cut ahead to 2020, when we suddenly had a national health emergency where everybody was staying home and they were being told to stay home. Well, how are you going to how are you going to see a doctor when everybody's being told to go home, stay there, right? So the DEA basically took that law and put a moratorium on it for a period of time, because there was something in the law that said if you have a national health emergency, that can be an exception to this in-person requirement. And so that started in 2020. It's been going on 3 years. Now, at some point, the pandemic ends, right? The health emergency ends. The government has decided that ends on May 11th of this year. So now the question is, well, what do we do on May 11th? Do we go back to the way things were before? Do we leave everything in place where it's just, no enforcement of that law? Or do we find some middle ground, something in between. And so the DEA is proposing a middle ground that's in between. And again, the DEA isn't thinking about TRT. They're not. It got bootstrapped into the Controlled Substances Act. I'm not sure it ever belonged there in the first place. I think there's a lot of evidence it should never have been there. Testosterone shouldn't have been a Schedule 3. But it is.
Right.
It is what it is, right? And so it gets bootstrapped into this change. And what the new change is basically saying is that you can get a prescription without first seeing a doctor, without first seeing having a medical evaluation. So that's new. That's better than it was, right? But within 30 days, you have to see somebody, a DEA licensed practitioner, who will approve and basically see that you need this, that there's a medical evaluation that you pass. You can see the doctor who's prescribing. So let's say you're dealing with a clinic in Florida, right? So, and let's say you've never seen this rule only applies if you've never seen a doctor. If you've seen a doctor, forget all of this. It doesn't apply.
But that doctor.
So
that particular.
So if you've never seen that doctor before, the doctor who's prescribing, and you got this prescription during the pandemic, during the health emergency, okay, you have 6 months in which to see that doctor or another doctor. Let's say it's the prescriber's in Florida, you're in Ohio, you have a family physician. You can see the family physician. Now, there's red tape to it. It's not easy. There's a bunch of rigmarole, doc. It makes no sense for testosterone replacement. I grant you that. You and your family practitioner are now on an audio-video hookup with the guy in Florida for it all to be approved. It's a pain. I'm not saying it's not. Still better than the never getting a prescription before.
But people don't have access to doctors anyway, so that's going to be basically next to impossible.
It's going to be tough. It's going to be tough. The solution for those who can afford a Southwest or JetBlue flight to Florida to see your doctor, once that's done, there's nothing in the law that says how many times you need to see him. In fact, it's silent on that.
That's the thing. The 30 days, Rick, is okay. This is for a brand new. You see a doctor brand new after the law is in effect, not before. If you have a relationship with currently today or in the last 3 years, you have 6 months extension to go see that doctor.
Right.
This is where the YouTube guys were great dudes. We love these guys, but it's like they're not lawyers or doctors. Right. Well, you and I have to live. And when I read the laws, I was like, these guys are missing some crucial things here. Let's get Rick on the line.
Well, they're also I've seen people say that you will need to see your doctor in, let's say, Florida, the prescribing doctor, every 30 days. So you'll be jumping on a plane and flying to Florida every 30 days for the rest of your life. I've seen and heard them say that. That is completely nonsense.
Right. It's not, and I looked over the law. You're a lawyer, but I looked over it because I'm a doctor and I have lawyers like you that I have to work with. And we looked it over. We were like, I was so scared. I was like, wait a minute. This doesn't make any sense, because a 10 mil vial of testosterone, that's lasts a lot longer than 30 days. I mean, right? So look, and I'm like, wait a minute, we got to get Rick on board here. So you got the 30. And again,
that 30 days, Doc, that 30 days is in there, not even, I think, thinking about testosterone, but thinking of Vicodin, thinking of opiates. So that's why it's there.
Right.
Now, I know that a lot of people are writing to the DEA and making comments and saying this makes no sense for testosterone. Is there a possibility that it could be changed? Sure. This is a proposed rule. It's not set in stone. And maybe DEA will come to its senses and say, well, wait a minute. Maybe this makes sense for opiates and for Vicodin and for, all of these, oxys, but for testosterone, the 30 days doesn't make any sense, and maybe we'll make it longer. Maybe we'll relax some of these requirements that don't seem to make sense. So there's problems with this rule. There's no question. I'm not a fan of this rule as it applies to testosterone, but we can't just, make stuff up and say, things that simply aren't true, like seeing your doctor every 30 days.
So I have one more good question, and I know you're busy, Rick. You're a busy attorney. Here's the thing. So you answer the question, guys. It's going to probably look better than it was before the pandemic, because before the pandemic, I've been around for, this is my 20th year, Rick, but the last 10 to 15 years,
You and me both. We've been kicking around, my friend.
We used to write for Muscular Development. You still write for Muscular Development.
I do.
I know you're the diehard. You're the last guy standing on Muscular.
I think I'm the longest. I may be the longest running columnist.
So it's incredible. So when you look back in this thing, before the pandemic hit, I had to make guys. That's why I had two practices, one Connecticut, one Florida. And why did I do it? Because I had to go see the patient. I couldn't ever do anything until I saw the patient for the consultation. And then if we decide together that we're going to go on testosterone, if I thought it was appropriate and the patient agreed by what I was proposing, moving forward, the patient was seen. I did my evaluation and we moved forward. And now comes the pandemic. So we're not quite going back to that because the 30-day rule, but the 30-day rule, this is more for opioids. It doesn't make sense because 30 days of testosterone is like, what? This is like a much more, longer acting, not to mention moderate. And I know it's not possible because the doc has to inject in the office, but if you get an injection of testosterone undecanate, in this country, it's once every 10 weeks. In Europe, it's every 3 months. So it's kind of like, do you have to get the injection and fly in the plane? And most, testosterone undecanate, I know you know a lot about androgens. It's not utilized that much in this country because the king is just the moderate acting cypionate and enanthate, maybe pro.
Pretty much.
And then of course you have the gels and you have the patch and you have the pellets and you have oral. We have testosterone undecanate. Mm-hmm. We have two forms of oral, but it's cumbersome, it's expensive, and there's nothing that beats the injection. So guys are going to get their 30 days. It's interesting because will they prescribe if they're doing a retail pharmacy, commercial pharmacy, which we use all over the country because and for me, it's easy. Most of my guys I've already seen for 10 years. It's repeat business. So it's like, where does it even put me? But we give a 10 mil vial at CVS. So a 10 mil vial, Rick, is going to last more than 30 days. So sure. It's kind of, what are the pharmacists going to do with this? This is going to be a nightmare. The pharmacists are going to give those 1 mil vials, Rick. They have these little baby.
I've heard some of them are actually doing that.
They're doing it already. We deal with it now.
They're giving ampules.
It's already a nightmare. Not to mention most of my patients, we get insurance to pay for the testosterone. It's a nice added plus. Testosterone
and insurance. So insurance can put its own limitations and requirements, as you know, and they can drive you crazy with all sorts of red tape. And to make it even more complicated, every state has its own laws. So we've just covered federal laws. So now you've got each state having its own laws on controlled substances and its own laws on telemedicine. So a practitioner needs to comply not only with the federal law, but the law of the states that are applicable.
So, guys, we broke it down. That's the Fed law. The 30 days is not for refills. Okay, Rick, right? I mean, not for refills.
It's a one-shot deal. The 30 days is for the person who's never seen. And again, none of this applies to anybody who's ever seen the doc. So, but if you haven't seen the doc and you have a new prescription, you can get it. You can get your medicine, but you've got to either see that doctor or somebody else through the rigmarole of Zoom or online platforming with a doctor in whatever your state is within those 30 days. Once that's done, the next 30 days, get your refill. Your refill may come in every 3 months, every whatever it is. No requirement in this new proposed rule about anything beyond that initial. And like you said, Doc, if you got a prescription during the pandemic when nobody was coming out of their houses for some period of time, you have a grace period. You got 6 months from May 11th to make that right, to now see that doctor.
So, Rick, that's where guys, listen to this, guys. This is really going out to the message for guys that are already under the care of a telemedicine doc in the last 3 years. I don't know the number. I looked at the number, Rick, maybe 96,000. Maybe 100, maybe 200,000. When it comes to this stuff, we're just completely, no one knows. And I appreciate that. How can you possibly know? It's a lot of people, a lot of men, not to mention even transgender, which we're going to go into the law on that in a little bit, in a minute. And then when you look at it, then there are some women, I don't prescribe to women, I just don't feel comfortable, but there are some women that use it for postmenopausal care, or they have low T on their scale, and it ameliorates their quality of life. Right. You have to watch them so there's women involved, but the vast majority here is going to be just standard men. So, okay, guys, if you're one of these guys, you have 6 months. We already have patients calling up and making, doc, I don't care what they do. I'm booking the flight now, and I'll see you within 90 days. You know what, guys? If you're in a clinic in Florida, Nevada, Texas, those are the big three, right? The big guys. It's like, guys, just make sure you could go down there and they have a clinic, an office, and they do, and just what's the problem? Go down to Florida. It's really nice out today. So, I mean, I don't see it to be a problem. So, guys,
always a good thing.
I mean, guys, it's not a problem. So stop the panic, because it's not, this is what it's going to be. If it's proposed and it stays proposed, we don't see it getting worse. Now, let me close on this, Rick. Okay. So testosterone, in my opinion, as a healthcare provider, being an expert in this world for 20 years in the streets, it's as dangerous as estrogen as far as the risks from a clinical perspective. It can cause blood clots, so can estrogen. The only reason, and the cardiac risks have been, the powers to be, the Lancet, fact check that. The Lancet is one of the biggest peer-reviewed medical journal articles that doctors like me, we put up on the pedestal. It's the top. It's evidence-based, it's peer-reviewed, it's just a monster. And so is New England Journal of Medicine. Okay, they in the last 18 months or so have really cleared, which I disagree with, the cardiac implications and risks. They cleared on a short term, like, well, within the first year, within the first 2 years. And I'm like, wait a minute, I've been on this stuff for 30 years. And years ago, I've been around so long that testosterone was great, then it was not great, and now it's great again. Let's make testosterone great again. And it's like, but there's no new data, so it's basically political. It's okay. I like testosterone. You just have to be. I tell guys A, B, C, D. I see the danger. It is dose dependent, man dependent. But you could really, if you're really, really aggressive with your management, you could really, with the grace of God and with good man, you could do well on testosterone, and you know that. So, men, you can go and see your places, and you could obviously work with the Anabolic Doc app. I have to throw that in there. It's not advice; it's just informational app. But men can learn what to do with their own caregivers. It's got to be a team. You got to see a primary care doctor. You got to do your A1C, blood pressure, cholesterol, get your cardiac screen if you're anywhere 30 something to 40. If you're on testosterone and you want to see if you have plaque in the artery, and I know you agree with that. And then it's sad that a lot of these places don't do that, when I think they're going to. Get a calcium score. It costs if you're a doctor, it costs $99.
What you may find is that some of these clinics moving forward may begin to affiliate more strongly with localized doctors in set markets. So It may become, so that there is somebody on the ground in New York and LA and Dallas and Chicago, where that interaction between the prescriber and the evaluator is not as difficult as it appears like it would be now.
It's a 100%. It's the future where people are going to have access, and people understand that it's here to stay, and don't vilify it. Look at the data. It's great for the man, and of course, women and transgender. If they're on it and they need it and they respect it, it's great. Come on, Rick. Right. It's a wonder.
Well, when you mentioned transgender, that's probably the only other thing I really wanted to make people aware of. And anybody who wants to follow me can find me at Rick Collins ESQ on Instagram. Please follow me. Always love to see you there. But it's interesting, right? Strange bedfellows, as we've talked about. So the community of both hypogonadal men and jacked up bodybuilders have very little political currency in these days. It's just the reality. But there is a group that does have a lot of political currency, and that is the LGBT movement. And ironically, 2 U.S. senators recently wrote a letter urging the Biden administration to take action to protect testosterone from being overly restricted for people who are transgender. And the idea is that
Yeah.
obviously somebody who is born assigned female at birth and who is seeking to become either male or simply more masculine along a non-binary spectrum has the stigma of controlled substance status, the difficulties that we've talked about, the restrictions that a Schedule III drug brings upon a medication. And so these senators have actually written and proposed, have urged that there be a change in the way testosterone is treated, that it either be removed entirely from the Controlled Substances Act, or that it be reduced in scheduling, let's say from a Schedule III to a Schedule V, anything that would make it more accessible to the trans people who need it. Now, it's interesting that, it took that movement to get anybody in Congress to really even think about how how the controlled substance status is affecting the patients who need it. But that's a train to ride for everybody else who would like to have a reduced restriction on a medication that's very good. I've read a few articles recently by trans people complaining about how difficult it is for them to get testosterone. Some of them were not even looking to fully transition. We're really just looking for physical changes that made them more comfortable in their own bodies. And that's something that now, obviously celebrated in that context, demonized in the context, obviously, of cosmetic use by people who are using testosterone simply, not for a medical reason, but simply to look better. So some interesting things going on there. If there's any sunshine or something positive in all of this, I don't know where it's going to go. I don't know where it will lead. But the fact that you've got two senators actually saying testosterone shouldn't be in this act, that's, I think, a good sign.
I was going to say, Rick, tell us this. What is the difference between where it is today as a non-narcotic Control 3 versus going down to 4 or 5? What does that mean?
It might mean lesser reporting and lesser recording restrictions. Interestingly, I think, as you know, testosterone and all anabolic steroids are Schedule 2 in New York State, not 3, but 2. Only state in America that actually has a higher classification. As you know, classification is based on the potential for abuse and dependency, right? How dangerous, how likely am I going to get addicted to this drug is where it falls. And, it does kind of make no sense that the people who live in New York would be more likely to be addicted to testosterone or an anabolic steroid than people who live across the river in New Jersey, right? I mean, or up in Connecticut. I mean, this doesn't make much sense, but obviously this reinforces the point that every state can have its own laws with respect to controlled substances and with respect to telemedicine. So you really need to know the laws in your state if you're, playing in this playground as a prescriber.
And Rick, when do you think we're going to get the announcement?
Government doesn't move too quickly, if you haven't noticed. So I don't know how soon it'll happen. Part of it'll depend how many comments came in and how much the DEA needs to review before coming out with it, and whether or not they're wedded to it as it is, or whether they're really open to reevaluating and rethinking and coming back with something that makes more sense.
I think it's possible they may just do what they do in a lot of circumstances and just put a pause on it and put it off for another 6 months.
I think a lot of the people who are really up in arms about any restrictions at all from where it's been the last few years would be certainly happy to see that.
Right. Rick, I think that's it, brother. I think we covered it.
I think we did.
Any closing comments, Rick? Or like you said, I want to make sure everyone follows you on your Instagram. Where else can they follow you, Rick?
So if you want to see me online, you can find me at rickcollins.com. Easy enough. Steroid Law, that's a website I created. Oh, geez. We're talking the late 90s. But soon after the law went into place, you were in a situation where the people who were using androgens, anabolics, either for cosmetics or sports or whatever, had no idea that the law had changed or how it would affect them. And the people in the courts, the doctors, unlike you, many didn't have a clue. The lawyers, the prosecutors, the cops, the judges, utterly clueless about what this new controlled substance would mean. And so I wrote a book called Legal Muscle many years ago, and I started a website at Steroid Law to kind of bridge that gap. I'm still active online. I'm very active on Instagram lately. So anybody who wants to follow anything we've talked about, or as new developments come into fruition, certainly Rick Collins, ESQ, is my handle at Instagram.
And Rick, we're going to have to do the anabolic doc and the anabolic lawyer, come together. It's going to be great media because look at this moving forward. I mean, the world is becoming more progressive in a good way. This is good progression for people, not just men. But we need to understand the medical and the legal side of this. Yeah. So thank you so much, Rick, for coming on the show, man. And
absolutely.
I hope with the grace of God, it goes just like we think it is.
We'll do it again. Great to see you.
Thank you so much, Rick.